Welcome everybody for today's live session. And this panel discussion is called Experts on Skills. I'm Mike Richman, your host for Exemplar Global's Online Auditor Expo. In the session, we're joined by five of our great panelists. Miriam Boudreaux, and she's the CEO of Moreau Management Solutions. Bob Clifford, lead auditor. Milt Krivokuca is president of Milt Krivokuca and Associates. Mina Matti is the CEO and managing director of Citywide Consultant. And Andrew Baines, who is the president and CEO of Exemplar Global. Now, in this presentation today, we're going to offer you a chance to ask questions of our great panelists to get their answers on topics that are really involving what the topic of this expo is about, developing your skills as an auditor. So if you have questions about that, or really anything that has to do with conformity assessment, you have 5 excellent resources right here that can answer your questions. So feel free to do that. When you have a question, just use the Q&A button. It's right there on your screen. Get that question in. If you can, I'd prefer it if you would maybe direct a question to one of our panelists so I know how to gear it. But if you don't, if you just have a general question for the room, that's fine too. Just throw that right in the pod and we'll get that answered for you as well. So speaking of our speakers, I want to give them all a chance to kind of give you a little 1-minute overview of the sessions that they did for you. So we're going to start with Miriam Boudreaux. Miriam, take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike. My name is Miriam Boudreaux. I'm CEO of Moreau Management Solutions. So at Moreau, we help companies achieve and maintain ISO and API certifications. We do this through consulting, auditing, training, and we also have our proprietary web QMS software. I've been in this field for years, and in my session, I was really excited to share 5 practical lessons that I've learned that made me a better auditor. These weren't just theories, these were actually practical tips that I've picked up through the years. Those were dress for success, break the ice, live with a bang, write the why and the context on all of your OFIs, observations, and concerns for those who subscribe to API, and then clarifying the 3 parts of a non-conformity because I still see people not writing them correctly. So that was my session.
Great. Thank you, Miriam. Great. And it was a great session. Thank you. So Bob, go ahead. Your turn.
Okay, well, thanks, Michael, and good day, everybody. I've recently retired from a 40-year career in environmental health and safety, 25 of those years as an Exemplar Global Certified Environmental Management Systems Auditor, and also a career as a professional auditor and a trainer for new lead auditors coming up with an accredited international certification body. When I was invited to give a presentation, I selected identifying nonconformities or noncompliances, as they're called, because in all my years of professional auditing or teaching new auditors, identifying nonconformities and presenting them to auditees or to clients or to companies is really one of the most challenging and misunderstood elements of an audit. If you've ever been an auditor, professional or otherwise, you're probably well aware of how at the end of the audit, you agonize over your report and you give it to the client or whoever is representing the auditees, and they take your body of work and they immediately flip to the back to the findings section. And then register a look of either delight or disgust based on the number of nonconformities they see. And what they kind of regard as an audit score. And so the goal in my presentation was to try and provide a few tips and techniques to help you manage that expectation, both the one the auditees have and your own expectation of how they'll react. What are the conclusions of your audit report? And my goal in my presentation was to essentially do that in a couple ways. And one was just to break down the process of identifying nonconformity into its component parts, the terminology and the process, and to remind us that we're less judge and jury than simple accountants. We add up 2 columns of information, criteria and evidence, and seek to make a comparison. An accounting of the results. That findings are a logical end of any part of an audit. and your value in the audit you conducted or your value as an auditor is not based on how much of any type of finding you identify. And along the way, I try to dispel some of the myths and lore that have arisen on the topic of nonconformities and do so with some real life stories. I did actually experience each of the stories that I told and afford all of us as practicing auditors some solace, some hope, and maybe a little bit of humor.
Great. Excellent job, Bob. All right, Milt, you're up.
Okay, thanks. I'm Milt Krivokuca. I'm currently, well, let me back up a little bit. I started my career in manufacturing for 25 years, and I decided I wanted to transition. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So in the interim, I was an ISO auditor for a couple of years, but I found my calling in the second half of my career was in higher education. So I joined a university as a professor teaching quality classes at the master's level, and I was since promoted to the department chair of a Master of Science in Quality program. And I'm currently doing that, even though I tried to retire a couple times, but they keep extending my contract to keep me involved in the program. And my primary responsibility is because quality is such a dynamic field. It's evolving, it's changing so rapidly. The topics, the curriculum is exceeding the textbooks. It's changing faster than textbooks can be printed. So one of my tasks is to mentor my faculty to keep them up to date on what the current developments are. A couple years ago, I really took an interest in Quality 4.0, what this mysterious area was, to see if we could develop a body of knowledge, why we don't have a body of knowledge, and really what's taking place. And I've realized it's a very large area. I don't know that we ever will get a body of knowledge that we can formally call Quality 4.0. But there are some key issues that we need to be addressing immediately, and that's related to digital transformation and data science. I've always viewed the quality audit process is the basis of continuous improvement and advancing the learning and the development of organizational excellence. And investigating where we are now, I see that we're not really addressing it in our quality body of knowledge, and I don't know how soon it will be formally addressed. So the purpose of my presentation was exposing the auditors to data science, and data science is coming. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks, it's coming. We're not going to get away from it. So we have to be prepared as quality professionals, and the more we know about it now, and if we look at the quality auditors to at least have a good understanding, and that's what my presentation did, was lay some of the foundations, pick the low-hanging fruit, so they can help the organization, so as they evolve in their digital transformation and moving forward, they're not going into the unknown. They've got the direction of a good quality program and the support of the quality audit process to help them achieve their goals.
Wonderful. Thank you, Milt. All right, Mina, you're up.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Mina. I am a Sydney auditor and a consultant. I've got a consultancy practice. The company's name is Citywide Consultant. My background started about almost 15 years ago when I was general manager of a construction company. Led me to studying construction and continuing to become a New South Wales builder in the residential and commercial sectors. And my career basically dragged into auditing. I've got a knack for detail, so I've been doing auditing for about 9 years now and very much love it. My presentation was about mastering clauses of technical skills and ensuring, obviously, the assessments and adding value to clients is inevitable. I bring forward to the table some extensive experience in people skills, bringing forward some knowledge about residential and commercial construction, and just basically advising clients on how to produce documentations, management systems for their sector.
Excellent. Thank you, Mina. And last but certainly not least, Andrew Baines.
Thank you, Mike. And hi, everyone. It's great to see so many people joining us for this live session. Mike, I'm Andrew Baines, the President and CEO of Exemplar Global. I've been doing this job for just about 10 years now, and a couple or 3 decades before that of auditing myself, so very familiar with this discipline. The presentation that I was involved with was along with one of my colleagues, Technical Director of Exemplar Global, Adam Maxwell, and we had the opportunity to discuss along with you, Mike, the case for internal auditing, and it was a great pleasure for me to be able to really shine the light on these unsung heroes of the auditing world. These are the people that are really at the coalface of the management systems or whatever the discipline is, who are doing this day in, day out, often in some isolation from their own colleagues, perhaps even within the business that they serve. So we were looking to explore the importance of internal auditing. We looked and covered some of the skills needed to succeed in the role of as an internal auditor. I think importantly also to recognise some of the key differences between internal audits and in second and third party auditing colleagues, and what the similarities are as well for that matter. And also to touch on what a background in internal auditing can mean in terms of an exciting career pathway as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. I see we have some questions coming in already. Great. But I did want to make mention, just as a reminder, if you do have questions, use that Q&A button. I see a couple of chats coming in as well, but use the Q&A button if you have questions. It's the easiest way for me to check them out and then hand them off to our speakers. And again, if you have a particular speaker that you'd like to have some feedback to your question, I would be happy to take that from you and then give it to the speaker themselves. So, but before we jump into the questions, and again, I do see we have a number of them coming in already, I wanted to just kind of put a topic in the room for whomever wants to jump on it. So this expo was really about skills. And we deal with a lot of different elements of the auditing profession and conformity assessment, but skills are something that people always obviously are interested in. They want to develop them. They want to prove that they're upskilling. So tell me a little bit from your various experiences about the importance of that, regardless of where you are in your career. I mean, because a lot of times there's this assumption that you need to get skilled at the beginning of your career and maybe you stop at some point. But I think, I don't know, I don't want to put my own opinion into it, but I have an opinion about it. I'd love to hear what you think about, skilling, getting skills throughout your career.
Well, Mike, I'm happy to kick off with this one. Perhaps I've been auditing one way or another for well over 30 years. If you didn't maintain your upskilling as you went through your career, just imagine how out of date I would have been. There's in those 30, 40 years, there's new standards come along, there's new technologies come along, there are new techniques come along, and on you go. So maintenance of both your technical skills and indeed your soft skills, I think is essential to maintaining the currency of it, whatever stage of your career that you're at. I think it's also reasonable for us to understand that the way you perform in the first 6 months of your career is not the same as the way you act when you've done it for 20 or 30 years. And we shouldn't expect the same. What we should be able to do is to mentor, develop, bring along people as they go through the stages of the career until we ourselves are the ones that are doing the mentoring and training and encouragement of it. So we shouldn't expect a homogeneous state of people in different stages of the career, and the changes that come about through that professional development that you should constantly look to do.
I feel like definitely experience, the more you do an audit, the more you're going to learn. But there is also the fact that some people click and they understand the standards, and so they can relate and they're just good at it. But you have to do audits. So if you're in your company and you have a chance to audit suppliers or audit your sister companies, don't see it as more work piling on you. If auditing is something that you like, I would be like, wow, what a great opportunity, because every audit, you learn more about the standard that you are auditing, as well as your skills just get better.
And it
I mean,
also,
I agree. Oh, go ahead.
My apologies. It also, I would say, improves your confidence in your performance, Miriam, to what you mentioned about providing audits in any opportunity you've got. So you're adding value to an organization is what it's all about. So yeah, just to add to what you were mentioning.
Yeah, and like you said, these are skills. Practice, 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 and don't be afraid to know that you've made a mistake, you weren't perfect, and recognize where your opportunities for improvement are, but just keep practicing, practicing, and practicing, and they'll develop.
I think my take at the end of my presentation comes from what Milton just said, which is I mentioned that good judgment in judging whether or not something is a nonconformity comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgments. In other words, don't be afraid to try to learn. Don't be afraid, as Milt just said, to make mistakes, but always be challenging yourself. And as Andrew indicated, throughout your life, there's never a point in your life where you want to stop learning, stop gaining new skills, and stop having new experiences. And that's essential for many professions, certainly the auditing profession.
Yeah, and not only the hard skills either. I mean, we talk about hard skills and soft skills, but there's a lot of human factors. This is a human business after all, so there's a lot of human factors that go into this also. That I think you can always be a better communicator. You can always interpret better the unspoken messages. I think that is something I've heard from a lot of auditors is the unspoken messages you get from somebody that you're maybe sitting across from a table with when you're doing an audit or doing an interview. You learn a lot from that, and having those skills too is invaluable, I think, for this industry too. So we do have some really good questions coming in from the audience. So I'm gonna kind of pair through these, and unfortunately I don't. Well, actually, yeah, one of these is directed to you, Andrew. So I will ask this of you directly, and let anyone else jump in after that. Andrew and Adam, you spoke about internal auditors being perceived as the quote unquote policemen in the business. Does that group have any tips on overcoming or changing that perception? So, in other words, how would you change that?
Yes, a really good question. I think one of the things to understand is that the process of an audit is intrinsically potentially stressful for both parties, actually. And that's based, I think, a lot around a natural fear many of us have to be told that we don't know what we're doing or we've got something wrong. And what tends to happen is, I think, with the auditees having a sense that I'm nervous, you're coming in to check what I'm doing, you may be looking for errors and faults and so on, and you're going to point them out. So I'm seeing you in that way. And I think oftentimes with auditors, their role they can see themselves as a role of finding non-conformances. I never took it that way. I've always viewed auditing as being a process of establishing conformance, and as a byproduct of it, where you see something that doesn't match what is supposed to be happening either to the standard or what the auditee says they're doing, then you can point that out. And if you do that in a constructive human way, then I think you reduce some of those stresses and tensions that are potentially there anyway. And your communication with the auditee is an explanation of what you found, of why that's in their interest to do something about it, rather than gotcha. And so reducing that, or probably recognizing first of all, and then reducing that potential conflict that's there, I think is what helps you to be seen as a more collaborative, helpful, constructive process than it is one of just being a policeman.
Yeah, if I could add to that, the experience I had followed the management by walking around. When I came in and I took over the quality department, I got to know the machine operators, everybody doing their jobs. And I spent a fair amount of time in the machine shop and in the offices, just walking around chatting to people, getting to know them. What are you doing? Oh, that's interesting. What is that you have on your machine there? And just getting to know them a little bit, having them open it up for an informal discussion. And then when it came time for an audit, I've already established a relationship. It was just a little more structured. I found out they were more at ease because I had already established a dialogue and relationship with them. And they seemed to be more at ease in sharing with me when I asked more formal questions than the informal ones and when I was establishing relationships. Now, that was a fairly small shop. I only had about 35 or 40 people to work with, but it worked for me.
I also think that there's a difference between your internal audit and your register audit, and keeping them a little bit on different tones, like a little more casual on your internal audit, and maybe more structure, or just keeping the register audit not as casual. And people have to understand that we all want to improve. But if there is a mindset of continual improvement coming from the top, I don't think they will see it much as a policeman, as this is just part of our culture and we all want to do better.
And I would say that the idea of auditors as police comes from the old lore of auditing that we're used to with financial audits or government audits, where in fact the auditors are the police. They're there by design to make sure you're paying your taxes or you're following the regulations. But not all audits are of the same type. And in my training classes, I'd frequently have long lessons about the role of first, second, and third party auditor and what they're about. Although I would challenge them to say, I said, who do you think is the toughest auditor? And they would say, well, you, Bob, the third party auditor. And I say, well, I would think that you, the first party auditors, ought to be the toughest, right? Because you're auditing your house. You're auditing your place of employment. You're always toughest on the ones you love. Shouldn't you have that same attitude towards the people in your own organization? You want your organization to be the best. If it means pointing out where we're not being and saying, hey, we need to do better, we need to do better. I think that's a good role for an auditor to have.
I think, Bob, in the sense of the way it should be, I completely agree with you. One of the points we discussed in our session was that the power balance is different often in an internal audit to a second or third party one. In the second party audit, if you take that as an example, you're the customer, you're the one going into a supplier, seeing whether they're doing, and that supplier wants to keep that business going. So they're going to accede into your authority, if you like. Similarly, with the third party auditor, you come in independently of it, they want the certification and so on. But oftentimes with the internal auditor, you've still got to audit your peers, your friends, the one you're going to go and sit and have lunch with. You've got to go and report back to your own managers and the senior group of this. And if they're not, as Miriam quite rightly said, if you haven't always got that culture that's really the right culture for this environment, then that can be really quite challenging in its own right. And I think that's also part of that sense of being isolated within your own organisation sometimes. And it's one of the reasons that we at Exemplar Global are wanting to build this as a community of people who understand these different dynamics of audit, whether it be first, second or third party, where you can be in an environment where people do understand the challenges of these roles, and indeed the satisfaction that you can get from doing a good job and moving things in a positive direction ideally towards excellence.
We got a question that follows up on this topic, which is an interesting little angle on it. So on the policeman theme, what advice do you have for internal auditors who have senior people in their organization not wanting them to raise nonconformances because it will make me look bad?
Oh.
That's for anybody.
That's tough.
I mean, that was part of the focus of my presentation, the nonconformity end of it. And so, of course, the idea of auditing being a community, being a skill, warranting professional certification, even for internal auditors, which I've advocated for years, all of those will make that process easier. But at the end of the day, what I try to indicate is it is what it is. Nonconformities, the number of, have a different value depending on what side of the table you're on, the auditee or the auditor. Recognize that, address that, and then follow your audit mechanics. It is what it is, was something that an auditor told me, and I always keep in the back of my head when you're trying to make a decision. You're not there to be the police. You're not going to be valued on having more than 1, 5, 10 nonconformities. You just compare the evidence against the criteria and make your decision based on those facts. Telling the executive, that's another skill.
Mike, I have a really good experience here. And I mean, I don't know if it totally relates, but I remember going to an audit, and it was actually a colleague of mine, an old colleague of mine. And I found just the place not in great shape. And I knew he was hinting at me not reporting everything. And it was a tough position because as an auditor, I have to report what I see, and I have to be just, and I have to go by the standard. But it was my friend who hired me, and I was like, oh God, this is not gonna be good. So I reported, I was truthful, following the auditor principles. And I said, that's it. I'm probably never gonna be called back. I'm never gonna be here again. I know he's not gonna like me. But I left the report, and with all the findings that I had and non-conformities. And about 6 months later, that person moved on, and the president of the company called me and asked me to come and help fix the stuff. And I just couldn't believe it. I was like, oh, well, somebody went and looked at that report. That was good. So you just have to follow your auditor principles and report, be accurate and truthful.
I think this highlights one of these real differences between internal and third-party auditing. For my part, I liked also to reflect the balance of what was conforming. Now, when you go and audit somebody, you'll find that 95% of what they do does actually conform with what they say they're doing or the standard requirements. And so the bits that are non-conforming are then put in perspective. If you can say to somebody, whether it be your manager or an auditee of a third-party audit, here's all the things that you're doing right. Now, just these odd 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 things, it doesn't matter. The things that are there, you get those fixed up, and it reflects on a greater degree of compliance. So you put them in proportion. If the only thing you ever talk about is the non-conformance, then that's all the auditee sees, and they focus on it. And I think, as somebody said earlier on, oftentimes what they do is they go straight to the back of the report and they look at the non-conformances. And for my money, it's just important to give credit where credit's due for the areas of compliance as well.
I actually had a client yesterday ring me to find out how did my report go? And I said, what are you looking for? And he said, how many non-conformances have I got? I said, what about everything else that you've done right?
Yeah,
So and he said, the first thing that I actually look at when I receive any audit report is I turn to the back and quickly see that number. And I said, what about the number that says how many things you've done so well? He goes, oh, Mina, that's a great way of looking at the glass half full.
And isn't it strange, that even when they're looking at the number of non-conformances, not all non-conformances are created equal. Sometimes you can have one non-conformance that says the whole system's rubbish. And other times you can have 5 or 6 or 10 non-conformances that are all really very minor in nature and don't really pose a problem at all. So it's not just a numbers game, it's about content as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my numbers story, Mina, was a client who didn't say how many non-conformities, but how many findings do I have? And so I said, oh, a couple dozen. And before she was about to fall on the floor, I said, and they're all conformant findings. To remind people that ISO 1911 describes a finding as either conformity or non-conformity. And so if as an auditor you find 2 dozen findings, all conformity, you've done a darn good job. It is what it is. And Miriam, to your issue there where the client said you don't have to put that in the report, you'll often hear people say, you're not going to raise that as a non-conformity, are you? And my answer is, no, I don't have to. It was here yesterday. Okay, I'm not going to make it a non-conformity. That guy's been here a week, but I am going to put it in my report because, hey, I saw him and that's what I've got to do. So, this idea that we somehow create the issues, we don't, we find them. And that's what we want to make sure our clients, our customers, our own organizations, how they perceive us and our value.
Well, we're starting to get some real good questions bubbling in. So I want to change the topic a little bit. So I have one here from Milton that is a really interesting question, Milt. So I want to ask you this one. One of the attendees asked, what suggestions do you have for using AI to write audit reports without exposing confidential information?
Okay, well, you pressed the hot button with me there, AI. It's one of the topics my faculty and I are discussing at all times. And let me state my perspective on it. AI, I've been studying up on it. I know it's advancing, it's here. But AI is only as good as the information that it has available that's already been in the system to gather and pull on, correlate, and draw together a report. As all of us as quality professionals know, that just about every instance, every occurrence that we encounter is pretty unique. There's no two that are the same. It requires creative thinking, evaluation, use of quality tools, data gathering, and analysis to come up with a solution. So I know AI is here. We're going to have to live with it. It's part of what we're doing in our everyday life. So the basic guidelines, we're in very early stages of it, is yes, go ahead and use AI, but don't include your confidential information in there. That should be left out of it so that AI can assist you and generate a realistic generic report, and then use your skills as the auditor to gather that information, which is confidential, that you don't want to be shared, and draw a correlation to it, put it into perspective, use your skills and knowledge, and take that report and customize it and mold it into one that's appropriate for your situation. Early stages, I don't have any real being an educator, college professor, I like to back my statements with a lot of case studies, examples, and data gathering. It's so early in the stages, I don't have a lot of information to support it. But definitely, yes, AI is there. I would not include any confidential information. I would have a generated generic standardized report that includes the information that you need and customize it. And that's really where you excel. Being able to develop and display your knowledge as an auditor for these situations and come up with solutions for moving the company and advancing the quality management system. I hope that's an adequate answer.
I think that's a good answer. Yes, and I think it's.
Could I just offer a thought there too? Because increasingly, I think we're seeing people talking about AI as if it's a one single thing. Perhaps we're thinking of ChatGPT, but it is here to stay. And what you're finding now is that there are various ways that you can use AI to come up with a bespoke solution. So it's not just a one thing. It can be one. I mean, we're ourselves looking at how we might use AI to do certain sort of things within the business, and being able to get them to support a function that you already have, I think is increasingly becoming something that's accessible rather than just using something that's external. Because I agree with Milt, you've got to be really careful with what you're doing with that information and data. But if it remains within your own organisation, I think you can then give your own AI robot or whatever it is access to those sort of things in a much more secure environment. Changing fast, though, it's an area of really changing very rapidly.
If I have my say in the next QBOC, the next revision of the CMQOE, I would have AI and ChatGPT as there as quality tools, not methodologies, to understand how to use them to support them, just like you do in FMEA or root cause analysis or any one of the other methodologies, and use it appropriately. That's my suggestion at this point.
I think, Milt, for what it's worth, that as this technology develops, auditing, there's two aspects to this for me. How do we audit where AI is being used? And secondly, how do we use AI to support our audit function? And I can see every good reason why an auditor could have an AI assistant with you, somebody that knows case law, somebody that has access and knows all the parts of the standard, what precedents have been set, etc., can be your note taker. Can you imagine how helpful an AI assistant could be, not to replace you, but to help you do what you do.
As a tool, an assistant.
Yeah.
I think AI is certainly a tremendous tool. It's a consolidator of information into data, and maybe some knowledge can even be derived from that. But can it truly create wisdom? The wisdom that human beings, that human intellect can add to the equation. Going back to what I mentioned earlier about judgment of auditors being derived from experience, and experience coming from bad judgment, or judgments in general. How can AI have that experience? How can AI learn from its mistakes? And is there a value in that? I think there is, and that value is what an auditor, a human auditor, has above her or his AI assistant.
I would also like to add that you have to be careful, because if you give, let's say, ChatGPT a prompt, just like where you went to audit, it could potentially create a report, and on the first look, you're gonna think, wow, it's really good. But when you really start looking at it, you realize, no, that was just fake. That was not real. And of course, you never really fed a lot, but it could infer a lot of things. It could say a lot of things. So you just have to be careful and read it through, because it will make up things.
And I think to add value to everything that everyone on the panel suggested today, my opinion on AI is I feel as if in the next few years it'll diminish human intelligence. We could use it as a tool, but not of reliance, because it'll diminish human intelligence, I guess, and that's not what we should be doing as auditors.
We have a question that kind of sharpens this a little bit more, this topic, into the skills area, which I think is really interesting. So the attendee wants to know, as the auditing landscape continues to evolve with remote audits, AI, and data analytics, what specific skills should auditors prioritize developing today to stay competitive and deliver great value to their organizations? I like that, because it brings it back to skills. So, and it also is, gosh, 10 years ago, we know what AI was. I didn't know if we knew how it would necessarily apply to business reality. So what's on the horizon that is going to change how we do our work in 10 years?
I think it's like the development of any tool. It's one of the skills that we need to develop within our profession, whether that be internal, second, third party, doesn't matter. We're all professionals, and we've got to learn how to use the tools. I'm old enough to remember how to use a slide rule and logbooks. Then calculators came along, and we all feared that people were going to forget mental arithmetic, and maybe some of them have. But what you do need to do is to learn a healthy skepticism of the answer, to be able to just know, yeah, that's about right. And it's in the right sort of area and vicinity. And I think these tools are going to be similar. Is whatever use you make of it, and to the point that has been made by the panel already, it's there to support and help you. And you need to be able to look critically at that and say, does that feel like it's the right sort of way? How does it enhance what we're doing? So how do we use these tools? How do you do a remote audit? What does that put as a challenge for you to gather evidence that doing something in person used to give you, and what do you replace it with? So I can't see that you're going to get the genie back in the bottle myself. So I think we should be embracing it, and we should be teaching people how to use these technologies as you would do in academia. It's the same with students who have opportunities to use AI. They're going to do it. So how do you teach them to use it properly in a healthy and constructive way?
I'd like to add something that Mina said about becoming just maybe not as smart, I guess, or losing some of your knowledge, intelligence. I feel like if you really want to become a better auditor and not necessarily bringing the AI tools, the core of the audit is the criteria. What is the criteria that you audited? And if you're going to have to be asking ChatGPT or any other tool, what is the criteria? What is this against? What clause is this not complying? I don't know if you could do effective audit or efficient. I think you have to still become an expert. So training on the standard, continual training on the standard when there is a new revision, or just, you have to know the standard left and right. And the more you audit, the more you're going to become knowledgeable. Otherwise, for everything you find, you're going to ask, ChatGPT, is this a non-conformity? Yes or no? It's like, you can't do that. You have to, as an auditor, know that standard left and right and know that is a non-conformity.
So here's a really interesting question, and I hope that you all can respond to it. When training a new auditor in your own company, what is the most important lesson to impart? I like that question.
I would definitely start this one. Strong communication skills.
Great.
Yeah. I feel like after COVID, a lot of people have been lacking the way they communicate with one another because of the separation. The most important thing, and this is what I use in my own business when we're looking for consultants or auditors, if you have strong communication skills, you'll get past any audit because you'll understand what the criteria of the standard says and how your client is responsive to it. So definitely communicate.
I may also add that you might have to tell them, forget how you did it in your other company. You gotta go by the criteria that we have here, the management system and your procedures. Now, having that experience, of course, is helpful, but always saying, well, that's how we did it there. It might not always be efficient anyways on the new company.
I would certainly agree with Mina that communication skills are essential in the profession that we're in, maybe more than other professions. I neglected to mention as part of my CV that I attended bar through college and graduate school. So that's where I got any communication skills I have, being able to deal with happy or extremely sad people across a bar, but very similar to my auditing experience. Just agreeing, Mina. I think communication, Miriam is absolutely correct. Knowledge, you need to know both sides of the equation, the standard, the regulation, the procedures, as well as on the other side, the veracity of the evidence that you've collected, or what the evidence means, or your degree to which you can rely on it. Those skills in and of themselves, and people might think they're soft skills, they're not, they're really very hard skills. Those are two that are essential. So I would say communication and judgment.
I would certainly agree with the general concept of communication without a shadow of a doubt. An element I might add to it would be, I think if I was advising somebody starting out, is to be just be human, have some empathy, have some understanding of what's going on there, listen to your own voices of your own intuition. I think intuition's often underrated from the point of view it's an assimilation of a lot of inputs that you work through, and it comes up with something, a gut feel or whatever it might be. So a combination of empathy and trust in your own self and judgment, I think enhances the communication skills. Obviously, understanding the business that you're looking at, if it's your own business, your own colleagues and so on, you have a better chance of doing that oftentimes, but that certainly helps. But it all comes back to whether you can extract the right objective evidence to draw an appropriately accurate conclusion on the balance of probability. It's always a sampling exercise, isn't it? This is not intended ever to be a fully comprehensive thing. So you are sampling, and I think having that judgment as to have you seen enough to draw a conclusion is probably a part of it as well.
I'll certainly second that. The way to use and deal with AI in the modern auditing age is to do what AI cannot do, which is be human.
Excellent.
Well
I
said.
actually, Bob, because you're completely right. My background's heavily in the food industry, and as far as I'm aware, one thing that AI can't do at the moment is smell. And when you used to go into a food premises, one of the first things you should be doing is just smelling. Does it smell clean? Does it smell right? Those sorts of things are hard to teach somebody else, for that matter, actually. Listening, I remember having an engineering colleague who used to say, I can hear when it's not right. He could hear machines running that weren't right. I don't know how you get a chat GPT to do that either at the moment. Maybe you can one day, but you're right, being human is an important tool that we have available to us, no doubt.
I think you just invented a new practice, Andrew. Management by smelling around. It's probably very, very useful in food. So Bob, here's one for you. Bob, you correctly said standards are either complied with or not. No halfway compliance. So why is the use of grading nonconformances still used? Grading simply add undefined subjectivity of opinion.
What I said in my presentation was that there's no requirement to grade nonconformities, particularly for internal auditing. It was invented for the certification industry to deal with the dilemma that if a company had a nonconformity to a standard, did that automatically remove them from consideration for certification? Of course, it's allowed by ISO 1911, and many companies do it. When they come to me and say, should this be a major or a minor or an OFI, Bob, I go, how the heck do I know? I mean, we've got our way from a certification body standpoint of judging whether something is major or minor, but that's not, and that shouldn't be yours. So I hope I haven't danced around the question there, but that would be my answer. That for internal auditing, simplest terms, it's conformant or non-conformant, and then as you go into the corrective action process, maybe you can then determine the severity of it, the degree to which you'll investigate, the tool you'll pick to investigate it. Should it be 5Y or a full, a fishbone diagramming exercise? Maybe that's the place to address the grading of nonconformity and the seriousness of it, and not the auditors. Maybe I'll put that out there and see what people think.
I think there's also an element here of risk and assessment of risk. Not all, whilst they might be black or white, it's a non-conformance or not. Not all are equally serious. The words you just used there, Bob. If you go through a set of records and one of them's got a spelling mistake on it, may be wrong or it may be absent, whatever. Now, if you get a critical instrument that's not calibrated correctly, that ultimately could be fatal. So those two things are both non-conforming, but are not. I wouldn't treat them both with the same degree of gravity. I wouldn't necessarily grade them either, but I would. You would expect some application of common sense and risk to the impact of whatever you've identified.
And I was going to say we've heard that from our auditors as well. You have to think, well, is this nonconformity, which sometimes I call them like Mickey Mouse nonconformities, if somebody wrote it because you miss one record out of maybe 10 or whatever you found. What is the risk? Did product really go out that was, underperforming, or did the product that go out had a risk of causing a failure, or maybe there was nothing? So in those cases, you almost have to make a decision as an auditor and just say, well, I'm not going to even write it, because if I write it, it's a nonconformity, but then it becomes like a, Mickey Mouse nonconformity. So might as well not write it if you don't think it has to, it has any impact on the quality of the product or whatever management system you might be dealing with.
If you reflect on the topic we were talking about earlier on about how do you convey findings through to perhaps senior management and how do they reflect on, and this is also a good example of that. There's a way of conveying something that's of much lesser significance than something that's far more important, potentially dangerous. And we shouldn't be under any illusion. It's our job also to point out to them the gravity of this, if that's the case. If I was looking at something that was a heat treatment process, say canning even in the food industry, and there's a fault in it, you don't want to be, you don't want to be beating around the bush in terms of conveying that finding, whereas other things don't really beat yourselves up about this. With something that happens, you'll fix it up by the end of the afternoon.
Boy, we're getting some great questions. This is such an interesting question. So audits often focus on finding nonconformities and problems, but as Drucker emphasized, real progress comes from seizing opportunities. Agreed. How can auditors shift their mindset and approach to help organizations identify and act on opportunities, not just fix issues? And I know there's some issues with that, but I'm curious as to what the panel's thoughts on that might be.
What's the question? How can the auditor seize on opportunities?
Well, how can auditors shift their mindset away from just finding nonconformities to approaching their approach to help organizations identify and act on opportunities, not just fix issues? Now, my concern was, does that leak into the consulting realm? I mean, that church and state separation of auditing and consulting. So I'm just curious as to the panel's thoughts about that.
No, I think auditors are in many companies, many industries, and they see many management systems. So they definitely have an edge on better ways to do things. So I don't really think anything wrong of them, but they just have to structure their opportunities for improvement, which is one of the things that I talk in my session was you have to structure it in a way that you're showing them the why this is important, but it definitely can be, you have to do it. It's just, hey, I've seen things done better, or some other companies have a more efficient way to do it. And by all means, you want to tell them that, but you don't want to say at all, or, infer that they have to do it and they are doing something wrong. Yeah, that's what I would say.
It stretches a little bit here. Oh, okay. I'm going back to my stages as an internal auditor. I'm speaking from an internal quality auditor. And as I mentioned about walking around, getting to know people, getting their trust, their confidence. And I was always on the positive side. I very much followed Deming's system of profound knowledge, understanding variation, getting to know people, understanding variation. And even though, it was definitely a nonconformance, no doubt about it, I would be very psychological in my approach to them about how it could be an opportunity for improvements. What could go wrong, where there could be problems, and how doing it differently would support continuous improvement just by choosing my wording. Now, that's strictly from an internal perspective, and I got a good relationship with the shop manager to where I would walk into them and I told them that you have a serious opportunity for improvement, and I would almost get face to face and look them in the eye, like read my lips, like, you've got a problem out there, but I'd tell them it's an opportunity for improvement. I never said it was a problem, and our manager would have jumped all over it and jumped all over him and really read all of us the riot act because he didn't want anything like that to surface. But it's part of the psychology of people and the way you approach it. I know that worked internally. I know that's not what I would do from an external perspective, but just understanding how you present it and establishing that rapport that they trust you, that you're not that defect detective that's out here to get them. You're here for all of us so we can all work and improve ourselves.
And I think in regards to that, the way to focus in on the opportunities, the good things, is to remember that audit findings, again, are of two types: conformity and non-conformity. We focus so much on the non-conformity, all right, and that's the executive flipping to the end of the report and looking for the bad stuff. But with the good findings in our executive reports, we always put that first. And I would always point out attention to it and say, you need to look at these strengths, okay, these positive findings for two reasons. Number one, it's a good thing. Be happy, celebrate, pat yourself on the back. Good job. But beyond that, is there anything in what I found as a good finding that you could leverage, that you could replicate? If I'm complimenting your training process and then have a nonconformity on your monitoring process, deal with the nonconformity, but what about the training process? What do we do there that made it to this auditor a cut above? Is that something that we might be able to capture, that genie in a bottle, and maybe apply to other processes? Remember, we're talking about processes here, which have a commonality amongst themselves. Is there something there we can find value in? So don't just celebrate the good things, seek to leverage them, seek to replicate them, seek to elevate them.
Excellent points. All of
And I
that.
agree. I think that gets overlooked too often. We don't take advantage of what we've done well, and we concentrate too much on the negative rather than the positive. I've seen that through the years.
And that's in the audit report, you know, where they usually begin, I've done the audit, everybody was nice, the lunches were great, and now here's your laundry list of malfeasances read out like you're reading the charges to a condemned prisoner. That's not what the audit report should be. Yeah, the adversarial third party, you know, the OSHA IRS audit, sure, that's all they should be. But you know, for our types of audits, they need to balance both ends. And again, not to, you know, sweeten the bitter coffee, not to make people feel good, but seriously, can you replicate some of the good stuff?
We are almost at the top of the hour, folks. I'm going to go a little long because we still have like 15 questions in the queue, and there's some really good ones here too. I want to make sure I get to this one. What advice would you give someone just starting out on their auditing journey? I'm in QA for a manufacturing company. However, I'm not sure how to start collecting my hours towards my certification. So that's a good question. We always like to welcome people into the industry. So what would be some advice about that?
I think my advice would be Nike, just do it. Just get out there, do it. Just go and do a bit here, a bit there, keep a log of it, keep a record of it. And actually, I would also say just go and enjoy it.
And ask a lot of questions and to listen to all the answers in detail.
Yeah, be curious. That's something they tell you, to be constructively curious. And if you actually genuinely are interested, you won't find asking those questions difficult.
Andrew's a Ted Lasso fan there. Be curious, not judgmental. I think auditors should be curious and judgmental. We're a little bit of both, the anti-Ted Lasso, Walt Whitman thing there. But yeah, I mean, I agree with Andrew. Just do it. When I got done with a lead auditor class on a Friday, I would say, now here's what I want you people to do. I'm going to give you Monday off. And on Tuesday, I want you to get one of your work instructions, make a checklist, find some willing suspect, and go and conduct an audit. Practice this stuff. And I would tell them the audit that you do on Tuesday is as valid as any audit that your quality manager has in the queue. And tell her, him, I said that. All right. So write it up, you know, put it in the database. If you identify a nonconformity and take full credit for it, you're as good as any of us at this stage in your career. But yeah, you got to do it. It's a skill. It'll erode if you don't practice it.
Yeah, and you know, the only way you can do 1,000 audits is to have done 500. And the only way you can do 500 is to do 100. And the only way you can do 100 is to do one.
Excellent. All right, I got one last question before we turn this off, and this is for everybody. So I'm going to let you all just answer it with one question. So, a question for the panel is this: is there any critical question in your mind for any of your audits which you think is the best question that you can think of? So, what's the one single best question that you think that you could ask of any auditee organization?
I think for what it's worth, and this is a very much top of mind answer. I could probably do better if I thought about it, but I think he's asking them to tell you what they think's wrong, right, good, bad. Just what do you think?
I'll second what Andrew just said. I have the answer to that because it's what I taught my auditors all the time. The one question that should always be in your checklist. In fact, I'll pre-print the checklist. You'll have lines where you can write your questions, and I'll fill in the last one. Is to ask each and every auditee that you talk to, so how is this working? How do you think this is working? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, all right, I guess, or could be better, but what am I to say? But 1 in 10 times when someone will say, if we were just doing this, that's the gold you want to mine, particularly for internal auditors. So don't feel afraid to ask that. And how do you think it's working? Well, what do you think? Well, you're the auditor. Well, I know, but I don't do the job.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? That's my question.
I think I'd agree with that one.
Awesome. Miriam, Mina? What would you say?
Well, I guess in general, one question that I will always ask, I'm just thinking of the standards, and I would be like, what could apply to everybody that I feel like if I ask these, I know they are aware, or, I always ask, like, if you see something that can be improved, what would you do?
Mhm.
And I feel like if they know the system, or they are even allowed to follow the system and make an improvement, they will know. But if they are scared, they don't know the system, they weren't trained, or they are just, maybe, I don't know, just don't have the tools, then they will not know. And that continual improvement is just like the cornerstone of all the standards.
I generally ask, what's your favorite part of your job?
Mm.
And generally, their favorite is their strength, and their least favorite is their weakness. And that will let me dive a bit deeper in the weaknesses. So.
Wow. Excellent. That was such a fun panel. I have 14 questions in the queue. We're not going to get to them, unfortunately. But that was really, really great. I really appreciate everybody who joined us. So thank you all again for being here. I want to make sure that you all claim your CPD for this session. If you haven't already, go ahead and check out all the on-demand presentations we have. All of our panelists here today, along with 6 other great sessions. Check them out, get your CPD for those sessions as well as this one. And I think you'll really get a lot of good learning like you saw at this live session here today. If we didn't get to your questions, I'm going to forward them on to the panelists. We'll get back to you with the answers. If you're watching this on demand and you have questions, just write us. Write us at info@exemplarglobal.org, and we'll be sure to get your questions over to our panelists as well. So again, thank you, Miriam Boudreaux, Bob Clifford, Milt Krivokuca, Mina, Matti, and Andrew Baines. Great work, everybody. You all are the best. We're very fortunate to have you all today here at our live expo. So thanks again. Enjoy the rest of the expo, and we'll see you again soon.